Hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Joanna Trupp from the London Stock Exchange, and I'm joined by Naomi Kerbel and Dafydd Rees from SEC Newgate. We are going to be talking about successful leadership communications around an IPO. So, Naomi and Dafydd, thank you for taking the time, and let's start with the first question. So how can CEOs connect with audiences that matter, and how is it changing?
Well, Joanna, I think we have to kind of row back a little bit on that question, because one of the things that I advise our C-suite clients is to really think about who their stakeholders are and what the outcome is from the communication. So if the communication is your standard annual report, there are ways that you have to do that, which are required by regulation, which are printed materials, but there are ways of doing more interesting things, and certainly here you help many companies do that, bring those to life through webinars, video series. But there's also other ways, and I think that really thinking about how you are targeting those individual audiences is key. One of those is through social media, and the obvious platform of choice is LinkedIn in this scenario. But again, coming back to being very targeted, thinking about what is it that you want to communicate, and really choosing content pillars as we think of them. Content pillars are a way to go, what is it that we want to talk about, and then how are we going to disseminate that information?
Yeah, and in the context of an IPO, the scrutiny is elevated to a level most probably that most CEOs haven't been through before. And certainly in the 30 years that I've been in this particular game, the pressures have only increased. The amount of expectation, the amount of interest, not just in the business, but in the personal. And that's most probably how things have changed is, you know, when I was working at the BBC in the 1990s, the idea that we'd interview the boss of a company never happened. And what we've seen in the past quarter of a century, you may say it's thanks to the impact of US corporate life here in the UK, but we expect a lot more of our bosses now. We expect them to understand context. We expect them to have some view on sustainability. We expect them to have views across all sorts of issues of responsible business, which is something we at SEC Newgate are particularly focused on. And then there's the issue of authenticity. So, you know, if I'd been here 10 years ago, I'd have been in a tie and a pinstripe. Now look at us all. How many people in the LSE turn up with a tie? Not very many. And, you know, the kind of communication that Naomi and I work in, it's become so much more informal. People want to know about you. People want to know about what drives you, motivations, emotion, empathy. These are all things that, you know, back when I was a nipper, wasn't really anywhere on the cards.
And that then provides a lot of opportunity as well, because as Dafydd was just saying, in terms of authenticity, you can reach a wider audience as a CEO and or any level of C-suite, and with that provides the opportunity to reach broader markets.
So why bother? At the end of the day, doesn't the risk outweigh the benefits?
So there's always a reputational conundrum of raising your head above the parapet, but we are not in a world now where you can just walk away and say, I'm just simply not doing it. Because you have a much bigger audience, and because social media can be brutal, and it's absolutely essential that you have a very clear, targeted message.
I'm so glad you asked that question, because that's the first question I put up on my presentation to CEOs as they prepare for an IPO. Why bother? There's a couple of reasons. One is one of the smartest things I've ever heard, which is if you don't speak up, others will fill the vacuum. The second one is we're in a very angry and anxious world, very fragmented. Social media's polarised our views. None of us are quite sure what is truth, evidence or fact anymore. And of course the world of AI, you know, goodness gracious, are we seeing so much activity in terms of how clients need to understand how large language models fill the void that they leave behind. So understanding that it's not good enough to put your head down and hope no one takes any notice. Those days are truly well behind us.
And you mentioned social media. So what do you find are the best channels for communication?
Well, I mentioned it earlier. I think that LinkedIn is a key channel. But again, it comes back to being really targeted, thinking about where your audience is. So, for example, if you're a makeup brand and you're listing, LinkedIn might not be the right audience for your consumers, but Instagram would be, TikTok would be. For some companies, it's going to be Twitch. There are lots of different platforms, and we do a huge amount of work in the early stages. So we're very insights driven. So what we'll do is look at the individual company and the individuals leading it, and then target the social media dissemination based on that.
And in terms of the campaign, however much time we have, the longer the better. What you're looking for is to understand, okay, how can I reach different audiences in a way that amplifies and integrates? I mean, you've heard from a whole load of people from SEC Newgate over the past couple of days, our public affairs, our advocacy team, our financial team, our corporate affairs team, our crisis team, right? You need a lot of people behind you when you're heading towards an IPO. I was at a dinner last night, and one of the people I was sitting next to is a chairman of a European tech business. And the one thing he said to me was, please, when you do this tomorrow, just make sure that you really emphasise that you need an integrated team when you're putting an IPO together, used to working together, who actually collaborate rather than compete and contradict. So that's one of the things, because you're surrounded by, you've got legal advisors, you've got financial advisors, you've got former politicians telling you to do this and that. Actually, what you want is somehow to find the right synthesis, the right integration of balancing the risk versus the opportunity. And one of the things Naomi does really well with clients in terms of understanding how you build profiles is work around events such as COP, New York Climate Week, Davos, and various others.
Choosing those really big platforms, and they're not always right. But the way I like to think of it is the basic trade events. Those are the baseline for our clients. And then in order to elevate one's profile on a global stage, to really be seen by key stakeholders as an elevated brand, that's why we take people to big events and do that sort of work as well.
So clearly authenticity is important. So what's the secret for companies?
I think it's pulling it back to not just spouting the company line. Right? What matters to that individual? So picking apart that question, I would say it's not about companies being authentic, because can a company, an inanimate company, be authentic? Or is it about the individuals that represent it? And that word authenticity is very laboured, and it often puts people off. I like to think of it more as being relational. How does what you are doing and feeling in this moment, in a life that is broader than just this work, how are you feeling about this? And if a leader is able to talk about, acknowledge mistakes and also successes in an authentic way, that's incredibly powerful. And again, I come back to thinking about the audience. The way you speak to your employees in a town hall is not necessarily going to be the way that you speak to investors. And so really thinking about the language and the way you tell stories in those different scenarios is key to getting the authenticity trick right.
So John, it's about permission to speak. And I'd encourage everybody watching this to have a look at our Responsible Business report, which we launched this week at SEC Newgate, which tries to understand, we know the public actually do want business to speak out and be genuine and be transparent.
It was resounding. 7 in 10 of those surveyed said that they did want leaders to speak out on issues that matter to them.
But there's a balance.
But there's a balance.
And that balance is about, are you actually speaking about something that you have insight and specific knowledge about? And listen, in the world that we're in now, Trump 2.0, what we're saying, in fact, in the past couple of days, we have been inundated trying to get people to understand just what this new geopolitical volatility will mean. There's opportunity, again, there's risk. Trying to understand tariffs. Now, at SEC Newgate, we have some of the world's most impressive and experienced knowledge about how trade works in terms of both between the EU and the US. These are things that perhaps 3 weeks ago you wouldn't have necessarily needed to worry about as you prepared for your IPO. You do now. So it's another reason as to why you're looking for an integrated team that can call on specialist expertise, call on real understanding and insight, backed by proper understanding of the key audiences you want to communicate with.
And do you think there's a risk for management coming across as insincere? And how would you navigate cultural differences and expectations?
Of course, there's always a risk, but that's what we're there for. You know, we do a lot of training with our clients around not sincerity, but actually knowing your message through and through, believing your message, and really understanding the impact of that message on the people that you're delivering it to. And once you've done that, that insincerity will disappear because, again, I come back to it being relational. If you have something that really connects with someone else, then there is sincerity built into that. So I think that gets blasted out the water.
And it's not just cultural, it's generational. And the work we're doing that shows the difference between the attitudes of my bunch, the Generation X, compared to millennials, Generation Y and Alpha, for goodness sake. The expectation's different. And certainly as one, let's call myself mature, not old, but one of the things I do try and work at, particularly with people who are my age, is how do they speak to different audiences who they're culturally and expecting something completely different.
I think there's a really interesting intergenerational piece there because we're moving into a shrinking workforce and an ageing population. And we can see that, you know, we've got 5-6 generations working side by side in the workplace now. Removing cultural barriers from that as well with global businesses. So actually, when leaders are thinking about putting together their team for an IPO, their teams in general, I think it's absolutely crucial to not just think about, multi-generational, and let's make sure we've got someone junior in the Gen Z position and someone senior in the, a boomer or a Gen X in the senior position. What's absolutely crucial is to think intergenerationally. Who is going to be the right person to lead because of their particular characteristics, their knowledge of this sector, and that's a much more rounded and strategic way of thinking about it.
And we can say that the old hierarchical, structural way of doing things, that is been and gone.
And so do you think for company management, how they say things is more important than what they're actually saying?
I think you've always got to know what you're saying, what the messages are you're going to deliver. We do a lot of work on that around the key messages you want to put across. But let's remember, people's attention spans are short, and so sometimes one message can be said multiple different ways. Certainly, how you say it is utterly key. You think of the great orators of our time, they often had one key message, and that was said, as I said, many, many different ways. It's not just about how you say it, but it's about body language. It's about what you're wearing. It's about your intonation. You know, if you sound bored, people will be bored. If you sound excited that there's an opportunity, then people will be excited with you.
Being consistent, being controlled. The reason why I cocked an eyebrow when you asked that question is because actually there needs to be one elemental truth. I wouldn't want to convey this morning that somehow that you tell a different story to a different audience. You tell the same story, just in different ways.
And so what's your best advice on when and where to communicate? And what's the point of expert advice?
So in terms of when to communicate, well, it will absolutely depend on a number of things, including the schedule of your IPO. Of course, there's going to be regulatory restrictions around that. What I tend to say about when and where to communicate is coming back to this idea of putting together a very consistent plan. Have a roadmap, and have the roadmap not just be from now until whatever it is the announcement is, but have a longer tail, because the message will go longer than that, and you want it to, because if you are getting expert advice, which of course we would advise, because people have, and to that, just to quickly answer that, get expert advice, because we are the experts. You're the expert at what you do, we're the expert at what we do, and you'll save a lot of money and make a lot more money in the long term by employing expert advisors.
Well, I say to clients, no one knows more about your business than you do. But actually, you're now entering a world where the scrutiny, the volatility, the unpredictability, expecting you to talk about things you've never talked about before, thought you had to even have an opinion on. And then the other thing is about challenge. So, it's very easy to get people to say, God, that's a great idea, boss. Love that idea, boss. You actually do need challenge, and particularly at times of, like an IPO, where all of a sudden your business is being examined, you're being examined. The world around you is changing, and how are you changing to fix that? That's a good time to seek advice.
Naomi and Dafydd, thank you so much for joining us today. You can hear more about this and much more at the London Stock Exchange's IPO Forum on Thursday, 14th of November. Thanks very much for watching.